Kia ora koutou. My name is Will Sweetman. I am Professor in Asian Religions in the Religion Program and also the Head of the School of Social Sciences here at the University of Otago. On behalf of the Religion Program and the School of Social Sciences, we're very happy to co-sponsor this Buddhist Academy Zoominar series, which is being organised by the Dhammachai International Research Institute. We think the series brings together a very exciting and diverse range of speakers from all across the world, and even if that means that some of us are having to participate in unusual hours wherever we are, we think it's great to see this international collaboration bringing together people from different disciplines, different approaches, and also different parts of the world. So we congratulate the Dhāraṇī on this series, and we hope that it'll be the first of many. I'm very pleased that some of our colleagues at Otago are participating in the series. Lina Vercheri will be providing one of the last talks in the series, and some of our colleagues will be helping to coordinate and to MC the different events during the series. So we look forward to the series, and we hope that you will learn a great deal from it and enjoy being exposed to ideas from research being done around the world in different areas of Buddhist studies.
Okay, this is my great pleasure to welcome all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is the 2021 Dhāraṇī Buddhist Academy Zoominar series, which is co-organized by the Dhammachai International Research Institute in New Zealand, the Faculty of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Cambridge, the School of Social Sciences, University of Otago in New Zealand, the Oxford Centre for Buddhist Studies, and the World Alliance of Buddhists. Before I will introduce our speaker today, I'd just like to note that in order to prevent any interruptions during the talk, the host will temporarily mute all of the participants, but you will be able to unmute yourselves when we'll have the Q&A session at the end. Also to note that those of you who need a certificate of participation, please fill out the evaluation form at the end of the lecture. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Imre Galambos from the University of Cambridge. Imre Galambos is a Hungarian sinologist and Tanguttologist, specializing in the study of medieval Chinese and Tangut manuscripts from Dunhuang. He is currently a reader in Chinese studies at the Faculty of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Cambridge and a fellow of Robinson College in Cambridge. After having studied for several years in China and Hungary, Dr. Galambos received his PhD from UC Berkeley with a dissertation on the orthography of Chinese writing during the Warring States period. Following his graduation, he started working for the International Dunhuang project at the British Library and became involved in the study of Dunhuang manuscripts and the manuscript culture of medieval China in general. After 10 years at the British Library, he came to Cambridge in 2012. and he has been the president of the European Association for the Study of Chinese Manuscripts and a sub-editor for the medieval China for the Encyclopedia of Manuscript Cultures in Asia and Africa, compiled at the University of Hamburg. The topic of Dr. Galambos' talk today is Untying the Bonds of Hatred, a Dhāraṇī from Dunhuang. So I'll give it over to Dr. Galambos.
Right, thank you, Noga, for the introduction, and welcome everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers, Prao Ponampong, and also the Dhammachai International Research Institute, and everyone else who's taken part in the organization of this series. I also thank my colleagues Costantino Moretti from Paris and Paul Koff from Chicago for helping me with research on this topic. So today I'm going to talk about, I'm afraid it's something maybe relatively obscure about Chinese manuscripts with a particular kind of Dhāraṇī from Western China. And I'm very glad to see over 150 participants interested in this very arcane topic. It's great to see that there is an interest in this. So the Dunhuang manuscripts include over 20 copies of this text, which is called the Foshuo baisheng yuanjia tuoluoni jing. So it's the Dhāraṇī Scripture spoken by the Buddha on dissolving ties with grudge-holders over 100 lifetimes. The text is also known from other sites along the historical Silk Road, and it attests to its popularity across a vast geographical area over an extended period of time. I'm particularly interested today in how these manuscripts look like, so their physical form, their physical typology. And the basic premise of my research is that these physical characteristics are of significance because they show how the Dhāraṇī was reproduced as material text. So some of them were produced collectively in ways that included the active participation of donors from the same extended family, possibly in connection with the commemoration of the dead. Other types of manuscripts suggest having been copied as part of larger projects. Finally, some of the manuscripts may have functioned as devotional objects in themselves. So I will share my screen. Can you see this? Well,
yes.
I can't see you. Okay. Thank you. So basically, first, I would like to just very briefly introduce this region where the manuscripts have been found. And this is in a place called Dunhuang. You see on the map here, this is below you see a larger map of Eurasia, or part of Eurasia. And you can see that this city of Dunhuang is located sort of it looks like it's central China, but in reality, since most of cultural China is located in the east, Dunhuang is really in the western part of China. So this is the part where China connected to the west. And this is the sort of the channel through which Buddhism initially was introduced into China. So sometimes during the first centuries BC. Here's a sort of political map, a modern political map showing where Dunhuang is. So you see this is really, actually this, the place is located in a corridor surrounded by mountains and deserts. So this was really kind of the only major path into China or out of China at the time. So it's really no coincidence that there have been manuscripts found in this place in such quantities. Here's a map of China, so you see how it's where it's located in China itself. And this is these are the Mogao caves in Dunhuang, in a beautiful sunset, and the flooding river in front of it, in front of the caves. This is part of the caves which are not commonly seen because this edifice in the rock stretches for about 1,600 meters, so exactly 1 mile. And this is the part that's not commonly seen. But the manuscripts themselves were found inside a cave in the part where there were other, they were commonly visited, basically. And so this is what the manuscripts looked like at the time in 1907, 1908, after Oral Stein has collected them or acquired them from this location. These are only a few bundles of manuscripts, Buddhist manuscripts, taken out of the cave. So this is a tiny, tiny portion of the original collection, which is much, let's say 100 times larger than this. So there were tens of thousands of manuscripts in various languages. Chinese was the most common language, most widely represented. But at least about 40% of the manuscripts were written in Tibetan. And then there were other languages such as Old Uyghur, Khotanese, Sogdian, Sanskrit, and even unknown languages, or at the time unknown languages such as Zhangzhong. But the majority were in Chinese, and we're going to be looking at Chinese manuscripts today. Also, I wanted to show you on the same map, we've seen that this is, Dunhuang is located here at the gateway to the west, but in reality, the same text is found in manuscripts and printed versions from other sites as well. So we'll talk about the Tangut versions, which are located, have been found in Inner Mongolia and Gansu province here, and then Chinese versions from the same time from the 10th century when the Dunhuang manuscripts were written, and then a little bit later, manuscripts also from Yunnan province in southern China or southwestern China. So this manuscript or this text is really very, very short. As you can see here, it's only about, 13 lines or something like that. And it's very elaborate the way it's presented. You can see there are the titles, and there's a Dhāraṇī or a spell at the beginning and at the end. And the text, sort of the narrative part of the text, is actually very, very short. So it's not a big text. Nevertheless, it was reproduced or produced in this very elaborate form. As you can see, entails having a wooden roller on one side. So the corners of the end of the manuscripts are beveled, and then this wooden roller is attached. And onto this, the manuscript is rolled. And that's how it's basically put away or closed or stored. Interestingly, this bigger part of the manuscript is on one sheet of paper, but then there is a whole extra sheet of paper attached to it. And this is essentially the cover. So when you roll up the manuscript, this part or the other side of this part is going to be on the outside. The text itself looks like this. If somebody can read Chinese, you can see how it's presented. I have a translation here. So first we have this, the spell, the Om, A, A, Im, Ak, and then the text goes like this. Thus have I heard, once the Buddha was staying underneath the music tree in the city of Vaishali, along with a group of 8,000 monks. At this time, a bodhisattva called Bodhisattva Mahasattva Universal Illumination, well known to everyone, explicated the causes and conditions stemming from past lives. The Buddha said, in the future, sentient beings of the latter Dharma period will often produce suffering born of sin. Once they have formed bonds of resentment and hatred with other people, they will have to encounter those people in a succession of lives. If there are good sons and good daughters who, upon hearing this Dhāraṇī, undertake the purification observance for 7 days and 7 nights, chant the name of this Bodhisattva Mahasattva, universal illumination, and recite this Dhāraṇī 108 times, then at the end of the 7th day, they will be able to fully extinguish all resentment and will not encounter their grudge holders any longer. When the Buddha spoke these words, members of the 4 groups of monastic community all rejoiced. They received the teaching and put it into practice. And then we have this, well, it's not exactly the same spell, but another version of it. So Om A Ak I Ak Swaha. So the pronunciation of this undeciphered part, as you can see here, it's based on Puli-Blank's reconstruction of Middle Chinese. And I'm not sure actually what it means. So if somebody has an idea, I would be happy to hear it. So according to the text, the Buddha's speech on the Dhāraṇī, so when the Buddha starts speaking here, is delivered in response to the Bodhisattva of universal illumination, who talks about these, the causes and conditions, the yin yuan of past lives. So here there's a glitch in the text, and we don't really know who is talking at this point. But then here, when the Buddha said, that's why I put it in brackets, square brackets. But at the end, it becomes clear because we can see that when the Buddha spoke these words, so it actually concludes the words of the Buddha. One interesting thing here is that the Dhāraṇī specifies that to ensure its efficacy, one needs to undertake ritual purification for a period of 7 full days. The whole procedure, therefore, takes several days, and only at the end of it will the grudges generated by past lives be extinguished. This 7-day period actually is very interesting because it connects this scripture with the commemoration of the dead of one's deceased family members, which we know also lasted for 7 times 7 for 7 times 7 days in medieval China. But maybe we'll speak about that a little bit later more. In terms of the structure of this text, it's quite interesting how sort of regular the structure is. So on the top, at the beginning, you have a title, and you have the title repeated in a shorter form at the end. Then you have a spell, so it opens with a spell and closes with a spell. And you have a description of the scene before the speech or the 2 speeches, and then the scene after the speech. And then in the middle, you have the Bodhisattva. So these are the 2 essential elements. So basically, you can see this as almost as if you're going up a flight of stairs to reach the speech, and then you're coming down again. So there's this culmination structurally in the text. But let's look at the physical typology of the manuscripts, the actual exemplars of this text that have been found in China, mostly Western China. So there are basically 2 types of, physically looking at them, 2 types of manuscripts. So one is scrolls, and there are about 20 copies in existence. And then there are codices, so the booklets, and there are only 3 copies of these, but all 3 are quite interesting. And in the scrolls, you have 2 types. So one is the single text manuscripts, and then the multiple text manuscripts. And their difference is not only in the number of texts included in the manuscript, but also in how they look. The format is a little bit different. So this is the manuscript I showed you initially, and I wanted to describe it maybe. So this is a representative example. It's only, the entire manuscript is only 68 centimeters long, but this 68 centimeters includes a 22.5 centimeters long cover sheet added to the scripture. So the main sheet with the text is 45 centimeters long and includes 2 blank lines at the beginning and another 9 lines at the end. Well, they're not really lines because there's nothing on them, but since the manuscript is ruled with vertical lines, then we can actually count the number of lines. So the scripture itself takes up about 1/3 of the entire scroll. Normally, a manuscript with this length would be just a single sheet of paper rather than a scroll. And so it is clear that in this case, the scroll form has a significance. Accordingly, the corners at the end of the scroll were beveled, as you can see they're cut, and a wooden roller is attached, as this was very common for longer text. And then we have this extra sheet, as we mentioned at the beginning. If we look on the other side, we can see that this cover scroll has a title here, and you can see the title here. There's this interesting phenomenon of having these marks at the beginning of the title. I hope you can see my mouse. So above the title, these 2 hooks. And this is something that appears in Chinese and Japanese manuscripts, pre-modern manuscripts. And it hasn't been actually very well explained. But in this case, the significance hasn't been explained. But in this case, it's very consistently always there. The title written here is not the full title. This matches the title at the end of the text, but not at the beginning of the text, which is longer. So this is the title that you see when you roll up this, when the scroll is basically closed. And there you have this silk ribbon with which you can tie around it and secure the closed manuscript. Interestingly, there is another copy that survives from Dunhuang. Is only this cover sheet. So you can see this is manuscript S6195 from the British Library, and it only has the cover sheet. The text itself is missing, but we know that because the size of the cover sheet is the exact same size as the previous manuscript that I showed, and we have the same title and we have the same ribbon, so we can actually be quite certain that this was a very, very similar manuscript. And possibly, actually, the other half survives as well, but it has not been connected with this cover. So here's the back of it, which is completely empty. And there are other, as I said, there are about 20 scrolls, and the majority of them are single text. So they only have a single text on them. And so they are very, very similar in how they look. It's the same text, but as you can see, it's actually the same layout, the same format. So they're produced in a kind of, well, definitely in the same type of environment or under the same setting. Here's another surviving version, and here, unfortunately, I only have this printout of a microform or microfilm, but you can see, so you cannot see the edges of the manuscript, but you can see that, again, it's the exact same layout as the previous one. And if you look at the other side, again, we have the same type of title with the silk ribbon there. And there are several manuscripts like this. I'm not going to show you all 20, obviously, but I just wanted to demonstrate that they're actually very, very similar. So they, even though some of them are located today in London at the British Library, some in Paris at the National Library there, and some in Beijing, again at the National Library, they really, really belong together because they share the same format closely. So 2 of these manuscripts are actually special because they parse the text differently. So here you have the text, well, you have the character hui, and this character in most, actually all other versions, belongs to the previous line. And so the line break, which is a paragraph break, which also implies the way you read the text, actually should come after the last character of the previous line. But here it begins the new line. So in terms of the grammar, it works this way as well. But what's interesting actually is that this tells us that these 2 manuscripts are even closer related to each other than the other ones. And if you look at the handwriting, they're actually in the same hand. So they were produced by the same person. Now, these were the previous ones. These were the single text manuscripts. And I wanted to show you the multiple text manuscripts as well. And these multiple text manuscripts are, well, they're longer, obviously. And so you cannot, I cannot show the whole manuscript on the screen, but you can see that there are a number of texts here. So in this case, our Dhāraṇī of Untying the Bonds of Hatred is on the right-hand side, and then it ends, and the title marks that. But then we have a different text, the Foshuo, Foshuo Yan Shou Ming Jing. So this is the Sutra on Prolonging Life, and so on. You have about, I think, 10 different texts on this manuscript, of which our Dhāraṇī is only one. And these manuscripts, these scrolls, which have several of these shorter Buddhist scriptures, including Dhāraṇīs, have been connected because of their colophons. Some of them have colophons, so they have been connected to the to this process, the process of mourning. So how you commemorate the deceased members of your family, and how you assign by copying these scriptures, you transfer merit to them. So, and sometimes the colophon explicitly say this, that this was produced at the end of the first 7 days of mourning, or the second 7 days of mourning. And in this respect, the 7 days, which are the 7 days that it takes to perform the ritual in the described in the Dhāraṇī, is actually a very close match. So obviously there's a relation here. So we can say for sure that one of the main functions, or maybe the main function of this text, of this Dhāraṇī, was to commemorate the dead. So in a sense, you are, when you say you're untying the bonds of hatred, you're doing this for this deceased member of your family. So when they're reborn, they do not have these ties anymore. And there are several, well, actually, at least 2 or 3 smaller scrolls with multiple texts. And these are also very, very interesting because they are half the size. So as you can see, they're written in a very clumsy way. And of the manuscript, which you don't see it very well. So these are still scrolls, but because the background is of the same color, but actually you can see that it's kind of a scroll that's been cut half, and the height here is actually exactly half of the height of sort of the normal manuscripts from the 10th, normal scrolls from the 10th century. So here you have two texts. So first you have our Dhāraṇī, and then you have the Sutra of the Bodhisattva Kshitigarbha. So both of these are apocryphal texts produced in China, and so we can guess that there might have been other texts on this scroll, but this is a fragment, so this is not complete. Well, fortunately, we have a colophon on the left-hand side. You can see this. So a colophon is always a fortunate discovery because it can tell us something about the context of creating the manuscript and also the date. So this is the colophon on the right-hand side, and I transcribed it here. So as you can see, it says on the 21st day of the 3rd month of the Wuzi year, which is probably 988, so the end of the 10th century, Fa Lü Zhang assembled one set of miscellaneous scriptures. And one of the interesting things here is this, the verb assemble, hui, and this has been transcribed sometimes as ding, to settle. But it probably is hui. I mean, it looks more like the word or the character hui, to assemble, rather than ding, which is to settle, to arrive at a definite version of a text. In either case, the funny thing about it is that the grammar is awkward because the verb comes in at the end of the clause, which is unusual. So the verb comes after the object, and that's not typical Chinese grammar. Interestingly, you have here in the form of this hook here, this is a reversal mark. So whoever wrote this accidentally reversed these two characters. So Iben, it should be Iben, but for some reason he wrote it as Ben Yi, and he marked it with this check mark, showing that the two should be read in a reversed way. So it actually means that this person did care about the sequence of characters, the order. It was important to him, but nevertheless, he put the verb at the end. So this way of, this grammar, of course, matches the grammar of many other languages in the region. And so we know that Dunhuang, so this region was very multicultural. There were many languages. And so the grammar of Tibetan or Sogdian, or Khotanese, even Uyghur, Old Uyghur, it matches perfectly this grammar. But we don't know basically who this person was and what his linguistic background might have been. Well, this way of putting the verb at the end or after the object is actually attested in Dunhuang in quite a few places. So this is a famous painting on paper of donors worshiping Vaishravana, who is depicted here in the center. And you can see the inscription here, which says that this person called Wang Shangqing is giving an offering, wholeheartedly giving an offering to the heavenly king. So the heavenly king is the object, and it should be at the end. But nevertheless, it's again the order, the word order is switched around. There's something particular about this manuscript, namely that at the bottom you can see there's a Khotanese inscription. So it's it's in Khotanese, and the same person, this Wang Shangqing, is mentioned there as the donor. So with the Khotanese inscription present, we can actually be fairly confident that the unusual word order might reflect the grammar of Khotanese. As for the person mentioned in the colophon earlier here, so this is Fa Lu Zhang. So Fa Lu is the person in Buddhist monasteries who is the or the person in charge of discipline of the Vinaya in the monastery. And here we see the same person, or the same name at least, written on this on the back of this manuscript. So this is manuscript Paleo Chinois 3826. So this is from the National Library of France, and it has two longer Buddhist texts on the other side. I think it's a confession text and the Pusa He Jiewen. And on the verso, which is largely empty, you see three colophons and also a little bit of other text. So here, you can see a close-up. Actually, you have one colophon on the left, then you have a contract, and then you have a fragment of a text about Confucius talking to a young lad, a young boy named Xiang Tuo. So this is only the beginning of that text. Interestingly, all of these lines go from left to right. So they go vertically, but they read in a reverse direction, in contrast with how Chinese was usually read or written at the time. So what's interesting us is the name of this person here. And you can see that his name is written here as Zhang Falu. I transcribed these colophons. Actually, there are three colophons, and one of them might not even be a colophon on this side of the manuscript, and they're quite a bit apart from each other. So the first one goes like this: the 18th day of the 10th month of the Gengyin year, which is probably 990. So again, the end of the 10th century. And then the second one says, on the 6th day of the intercalary 5th month of the Wuzi year, Fa Lu, somebody, copied in his own hand a copy of the He Jiewen. So in this case, the Fa Lu, somebody, and it's left out, I'm sorry, from the transcription, but there's an extra character here. And it's illegible, the name. Some scholars have transcribed it as Fa Lu Zhang, because on the next one, in the next colophon, the one we see here, we have that name reappearing again. So it says, on the 26th day of the 2nd month of the Wuzi year, which is probably 988, Fa Lu Zhang wrote a copy of the He Jiewen. Now, actually, so, oh yeah, here it is, Zhang Fa Lu. So we don't know if it's Zhang or not, but actually on the manuscript, it doesn't look anything like Zhang. So it probably is not Zhang. But what's interesting that in the third colophon, we do have the same name, or probably it's Zhang is a name and Fa Lu is a title, which might have been quite, well, it was quite popular, this title, so it might not be the same name, the same person. But interestingly, in this case, we see again a similar thing, that the verb is put at the very end after the object. So if we go back here, it's kind of hard to read what's happening here. So I'm not sure how to read this character, or nobody's sure how to read this character. But it seems that must be the verb, and it's placed at the end after the object. So this kind of connects the two manuscripts. The one with Zhang Falu in the previous example, and this one with Zhang Falu here. And in fact, the handwriting actually is quite similar. So it's possible that they were written by the same person, but we don't know. Now moving on to, so from scrolls, moving on to an entirely different group of manuscripts, and these are the 3 codices. And I'm not going to show you all the codices, well, all 3, but I'm just showing you one, an example here. So this is, you can see this codex is actually quite small, so it's not like a modern notebook or book, but maybe half the size of that, or even smaller. So these are not very big, and the small size implies that they were carried on the body, and so probably they were either used commonly or they served some sort of protective or talismanic function on the body. And the interesting thing is that these codices are also they also consist of a series of these shorter texts, and again, these shorter texts are probably connected with the with mourning, with the commemoration of death, because they're the same kind of text. So, for example, the Sutra of the Bodhisattva Kshitigarbha. So this was this sutra is closely connected with the with death, with the transfer of merits, and with ensuring that the deceased ones are, or they get credit, or they get merit and are reborn in a better place. And so basically they're with eliminating their negative karma from the past. Going back to this map that I showed you at the beginning, I also wanted to emphasize that, so we only looked at manuscripts that come from Dunhuang, from here, from Gansu province. And that's basically the title of my talk, or the topic of my talk. But the same text also is known from other sites. So for example, up here, we have the region of the city of Karakoto. So this is the site where manuscripts and printed texts of written in Tangut, most of them from the 12th century, some from the 13th century, were excavated. And so the same text survives actually in 2 copies in Tangut. So one of them is from this site in Karakoto, and the other one is from here. It's a site in Gansu province called Haimudong. And so both of them have a Tangut version of the same Dhāraṇī scripture. And interestingly, the Tangut version does not exactly match the Chinese one. I mean, the difference is minor, but nevertheless, it's quite interesting because the same text also appears in a number of other places. So in Shanxi, in a stupa, I think it was a 11th century stupa, and the manuscripts actually came from the late 10th century. So they match the Dunhuang manuscripts in terms of the date. And so they also have the same text in manuscript form and also in printed form. And later on, a little bit later, you have copies from Yunnan. And the Yunnan versions are quite interesting because they're very close to Burma, to Thailand, to Laos. And they appear on graves, on tombstones. So on tomb inscriptions, there are at least 2 copies of them, and it's very clear again that there is a connection with transferring the merit generated from performing this ritual to the deceased person. So because it appears on a tombstone, so this connection with mourning, with benefiting the deceased is actually quite obvious there. And then a further, and unfortunately I don't have pictures of this, but a further application of this text from later period, from say the 15th century and even 16th century, is that you find them printed on the single sheets of paper, which were burned on the altar. Again, they were burned for the benefit of the deceased. And so because they were printed in enormous quantities, we would expect that many of them survived, but unfortunately that's not the case, because most of them were burned immediately. So they were burned immediately, and the whole purpose was to be burned. But again, we have this very close connection with the deceased, with the commemoration of the dead. So because of this, we can say that in most cases, this Dhāraṇī scripture was connected with the commemoration of the dead. The physical appearance of these manuscripts, we can say that in some cases, for example, when we have multiple text manuscripts, so whether it's on codices or scrolls, they can be seen that they're connected with this function. So they're related to mourning. For this single text manuscript, the most beautifully produced scrolls, we do not have this obvious connection. And actually those scrolls are the majority of our examples. But it's very clear that they were produced somehow in larger quantities as part of the same, probably official project. And also that they were put together, they were mounted by a professional person. The handwriting, on the other hand, was not professional. So it was good handwriting, but it was not by somebody who was extremely skilled in calligraphy. So that makes one think that maybe the person who was the donor, who was the sponsor, was responsible for the copying, and the mounting and the binding was and the dyeing of the paper was performed by people who were professionals. And in terms of the date, we can say that actually all of the examples in Dunhuang probably date from the late 10th century. So we should see them in the context of the political and social circumstances in that city. All right, so I'll stop here, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Galambos. Since we have such a large number of participants today, I suggest that you type in the chat box the word question if you have a question, and this way we can moderate the number of questions we present to Dr. Galambos. So please feel free to type your questions or type the word question in the chat box right now, and we'll go ahead and start the Q&A. Yes, Henrik would like to make a comment.
Henrik?
Yeah, I just had to mute the. I just had two things. Thanks for a very interesting talk, actually, because this is a text I have been looking at quite a bit myself already, and but I have left it on the back burner for some time. I had just two. These are basically comments. I think that to start with the last one that you mentioned, that these the scroll format scriptures, I would suggest that they are probably donations made for a library, and that's why they have the scroll form. And that scroll form in particular, I think you're right also that they're 10th century, because it's connected to Dao Zhen, I think. His attempt, this famous monk, local monk, who tried to rebuild part of the library at the Sanjia. in Dunhuang. So I think that's you're quite right about that, and the fact that they are very formally made in a kind of a, how can I say, very neat format, even if you can say the handwriting is not perhaps top. I think that would suggest that they are part of a collection, probably made by some rich donor or something like that, to be distributed for various institutions. And so my first comment was on your uncertainty about the Fa-Lü. You mentioned this Zhang Fa-Lü, and a Fa-Lü is a title simply. It's the same as the common form you use today for Fa-Shi, for a Buddhist monk basically. So it indicates a monk or a nun who has full ordination, and so they have a kind of a status as a senior cleric or something like that. And you can verify this by, if you look in the collection of inscriptions for donors in the caves, you find this Fa-Lü appearing all the time as connected to the names of the monks or nuns that participate in these offerings. So, well, that was it.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I thought I didn't pursue this in this topic in this talk, but the single text scrolls, that format is it. What really interesting is that some of the text some of the examples from the Shende Si from Shanxi province are also in that format. So if it was a rich person who was doing this project, then there might have been several rich people doing similar projects in different parts. Because that time Dunhuang was outside of the Sung realm, and I think Shende Si would have been inside.
Yes, but I think that what you see is that they were made in, as you mentioned, also in numbers. And I think so it would be normal for one donor of a certain status to actually donate maybe, say, 30 copies or 20 copies or something like that. So I think this actually is a way to explain also the why we see so many copies of this text. And I think you are right that it is partly, I mean, I think the text is an example of a text which is itself a representative of a spell. So the text itself is actually a magical object, aside from whatever message it will carry. And I was not surprised about your problem with the spell. It's the very short spell itself in the text, because that's very enigmatic. And the best solution I would suggest is that it's because it's an apocryphal spell. Actually, it's not actually representing Sanskrit, but is in a kind of pseudo Sanskrit.
Yeah. But it's very stable because all of the manuscripts have it.
Absolutely.
Almost without mistake. So very interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
We have a general question from Dhammadeepa asking, what is the difference between a mantra and a Dhāraṇī?
Well, I'm definitely not the best person to answer this. All I can say is that this text is specifically identified as a Dhāraṇī in the title. So I'll go with that and call it a Dhāraṇī or an invocation or something, or a spell. And I wouldn't use the word mantra for it. But again, it's not my area of expertise. Sorry.
Carmen, would you like to ask your question, or would you like me to read it?
Yes, I can ask my question. Thank you, Imre, for the lovely presentation and your materials. I was wondering about the Haimudong material. That's very interesting that it appears in Haimudong as well. Can you say something about the context of what other materials were found together with this Tangut text in Haimudong?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I can say a little bit in terms of that. I know that on the same manuscript, or printed, I'm not even sure, on the same text or along with the same text, there were a couple of other Dhāraṇī type texts as well. And they've been translated, but they haven't been identified. And I think they would be, actually, it would be really interesting to look at the Chinese multiple text manuscripts and see if we can locate. I mean, if we were to look somewhere, it would be in those places where we could see how, with which texts this particular Dhāraṇī was paired with, and so that's sort of the small context. Otherwise, I have to be honest that I haven't even been able to look at this text even in printed form because, well, our library is entirely closed because of the COVID, and so it's been over a year that we couldn't have access to any of this. So
do you know which century it is?
Was that?
Time? Do you know which century it is?
I don't know. Well, I assume again it's 12th, 13th century, but I don't know for sure. And I don't think it's dated, but from the site, probably it's possible to determine.
Thank you.
Okay, we also have a question from Chen Weifeng. Would you like to ask it, or would you like me to read it?
Yeah, I would like to ask Dr. Galambos myself.
Hi.
Hi, Dr. Galambos. Nice meeting you.
Long time no see. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you think this text is a Chinese Buddhist apocryphal scripture.
Well, I kind of assumed that it is, yes. I don't see any. I mean, partly because of the date, and also the type and the context. I kind of assumed that this is an apocryphal scripture. Like, what do you think?
Some scholars think it is because there's no record in Chinese Buddhist catalogs, but some scholars they are not very sure because there's no evidence. The structure is very kind of standard, maybe. So far there's no evidence, strong evidence indicating that it's apocryphal or not. So I'm not very sure. So that's why I'm asking this question.
Oh, I see. Yeah, well, I as I said, it was kind of an assumption, an immediate assumption on my part that this was a apocryphal text, partly because we don't see it anywhere else. I mean, we see it later, but before this, before Dunhuang, it's we don't see it anywhere. And even in Dunhuang, it surfaces in the second half of the 10th century, and then it becomes very popular. So then it's in the Ming Dynasty, it becomes very popular. So it's printed in a capital in different collections, but before that, it's not. But I don't have strong evidence for either.
I see. Since you mentioned the Ming Dynasty version, have you noted that the version in the Jiaxing canon?
Yes, and it's in the Jiaxing canon.
Yeah,
it's slightly different. Well, it's actually almost the same except for the Dhāraṇī at the end, for the spell at the end, and there are like 2-3 characters that differ. And interestingly, some of that matches the Tangut version, but some of it doesn't. So it's quite interesting, and it would be interesting to kind of do a more in-depth study of this.
Do you think the Tangut version was translated from the Chinese, or the verse from Chinese, it was translated into Tangut?
Well, I am very certain that it was translated from Chinese into Tangut.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Definitely.
Okay. We also have a question from Nikita about the image of Vaishravana. Would you like to ask it?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. Hello, Professor Galambos. Thank you for your inspiring talk. You showed us this picture from Bibliothèque Nationale with Vaishravana and 2 inscriptions in Chinese and in Khotanese. So my question will be, so you mentioned that the same name of the donor is mentioned in Chinese and in Khotanese inscription. Are there any other similarities between them? So to say, are they just copies of the same inscriptions? Is the first question. And the second one, what was the point of writing two inscriptions in various languages on the same image, so to say? Thank you.
I see. Well, I'm not sure I understand your first question, which was, are there other similar examples?
Yeah.
Or?
No. I mean, is this just a Khotanese translation of Chinese inscription?
No, it's not. It's not.
Are they identical? Okay.
They're not identical. No, they're not identical, but they kind of say similar things, but not identical. But this person, he's called in Khotanese, this Wang Shang Qing is called Huam Shan Qing or something like that. And so it's been concluded that this is the same person. And actually, there are not two inscriptions on this painting, but three. So there's another inscription in Chinese on the right-hand side, a short one, which seems to be a different, yet another different person. Why you would have two inscriptions in different languages? I think this happens quite a lot. So you have bilingual. Well, you have bilingual manuscripts or multilingual manuscripts, and I would say the point is not to translate something like, because this is some sort of invocation, so you don't want the deities to. You're not afraid that they might not understand what you did in one language, but this is probably somehow connected to how this painting was used, and so maybe they represent different instances in the usage of the painting, so different rituals. So at one point, there was a ritual when the first inscription was added, and then another ritual when the other one was added, possibly. But I don't
Okay,
think we know.
Thank you.
I don't think we know the exact answer to this.
Okay, we have a question. What is the name of universal illumination bodhisattva in Chinese?
I think it's Pu Guangming Pusa. Hold on, I can find it.
If you can write it in the chat box, then all of our
Oh, it's Pu Guang. Okay, I'm writing it in the chat box. So Pu Guang Pusa Mohesa.
Okay. We also have a question from Xie Hanlin. Would you like to ask it? It's
Yeah,
about
hi, Dr. Gamboa. I have a question about the content. So the content that I go back to like C beta to search, the Dhāraṇī part of the sutra is a little bit different from the manuscript you show us. So I just interested in why and how it's a bit different. Because on the manuscript you show us is only like a really short Dhāraṇī at the end. But when I found the text on C beta, there's quite a long, like 3 sentences about it. So
yes, so I think the one, probably because the one in C beta is based on the Jiaxing canon version.
Okay.
Which has a longer spell at the end. But we would have to look at where the C beta got. Well, C beta is from the Taisho Zhang, right? So the Taisho Tripitaka. And so we have to look at where the Taisho Tripitaka got the text from. But in this case, it actually doesn't matter that much because that's a much later business. So we have the original manuscript, and so we can kind of stick to that text because it's a 10th century text as opposed to early 20th century version, or if a main text in the Jiaxing canon.
So it's really interesting to see how, you know, the spread of the text and. But thank you.
No, thank you.
We have a question from Louis Donny.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks very much for another great talk. So if we can assume for the moment that this is pseudo-epigraphical or apocryphal, could we look at the content and try and kind of connect it to other Dhāraṇī literature and start to get some sense of what milieu it might have come out of, or other examples that it could have borrowed from in its creation?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one actually, well, that wouldn't be the first thing I would do with this text. So I would, for example, look for Tibetan examples. I would be very interested. If it's translated into Tangut, I would assume that it was also translated into Tibetan, but I don't know. I haven't found, not that I looked very closely, but I haven't found any examples of that. So maybe yes, maybe no, but that would be sort of the first direction in which I would go. In terms of the content, it's the thing that's really striking about this text is that there's some mistakes in it, some obvious simple mistakes. I mean, it's a very short text, but nevertheless, you find one or two mistakes that are very, very easy to correct. You would just replace the character with a different one that sounds the same. And yet, the text is incredibly consistent throughout all the examples and also over the centuries. So it's that same not quite perfect text that becomes very, very popular. And it's never changed. Nobody corrects it.
Even in the translations?
Well, the translation, well, it's the Tango translation. So I don't remember what they did with the mistake. I mean, it's not a major mistake, but yeah. But in Chinese, you would think, you know, somebody would take the effort to correct it, but obviously they didn't, because they thought this was the text, right? So the text was, in a sense, was sacred, and so they never touched. They never made the correction.
Great. Okay. No, thank you. That's a good lead.
Thank you.
Could I actually ask a follow-up question on that? Do we know what the connection might be to oral traditions? Are we sure that we're only talking about, you know, textual milieu and not, you know, a verbal transmitted Dhāraṇīs?
Yeah, I think we can be extremely sure because of the because of how consistent it is, and you have these spells which are pretty much meaningless. I mean, we cannot decipher them, so I assume local people who use them couldn't decipher them. But these spells are incredibly accurate to the last radical, Chinese character radical, and they're very consistent. So I think this is a text that, I mean, I assume it was performed and vocalized, but nevertheless it spread or was transmitted in writing. I mean, but as a Dhāraṇī, it obviously has a vocal, you know, component to it. But I don't think it's something like a folk tale that was transmitted for centuries, maybe without writing it down. I think it was always a written tradition, and the fact that we have these very identifiable forms, physical forms of the manuscript, also speaks to that. So there was always some sort of tradition of producing the manuscript, some sort of ritual background that was identical for not just one it was identical for several manuscripts. So even if maybe, as Henrik was saying, they were donated to the library, they were copied one from the other always. So this was not something somebody would write from memory.
Yeah, this also goes hand in hand with the map that you showed with the circulation, the geographical circulation of these texts. It's very striking. Could you also say something about this spread of the text, the fact that we see them in such different regions? Does this correspond to the spread we see of other scriptures of this kind?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, this one is, the interesting thing is that in the, let's say, before the Ming period, so I don't know, before the 15th century, let's say, you only have them in Western China. So even the Yunnan copies, they are kind of in the West, and so they're kind of outside the mainstream Chinese tradition. And then with the Ming Dynasty, maybe because of the sort of the unifying effect of the Ming Empire, then it spreads, and then it appears in sort of central Chinese regions as well. Yeah, but other texts, I mean, there are all sorts of distributions depending on the text. Yeah.
Very interesting. We also have a question from June. June, would you like to ask it?
Hi, June.
Hi. Thank you, Dr. Galambos, for sharing such interesting manuscript along with the text. My question is just yeah. My question is just a very general interest. I'm just wondering if there are other similar materials from Dunhuang or just from the time period in general which deal with this topic of how to deal with revenge. Yeah.
Well, this is not revenge, right? This is, what do you mean, revenge?
Because I'm thinking, well, because in the manuscript it says something like there are these karma in the past, and there's something about the yuan. So.
Oh, I see. I see.
Like resentment and anger. So you have these kind sons and daughters chanting the Dhāraṇī for you, and all these problems will be solved. So I'm just thinking, like, is there like a specific kind of issues in the society at the time that makes people to utilize such text to basically solve their problem? Yeah.
Well, I think the sort of the function of this text is really to eliminate the possibility of, let's say, revenge or something. So if you wrong somebody in your life, and then when you're reborn later, you're going to have some sort of tie or bond with that person, a negative one. And so maybe you get back what you know. So it's not really revenge, but it's kind of a recompensation. The point of this Dhāraṇī is to cut that tie, but not for yourself, but let's say for your deceased grandfather or father or somebody. And that theme of basically eliminating bad karma from past lives is very common in this period in texts related to mourning. But it was probably common before. I mean, people mourn their beloved ones before that too. But somehow in Dunhuang, we have a large number of manuscripts from this period that are related to this. So, for example, Professor Stephen Tyser's book, right, on the 10 Kings, that's also very closely related to these, and it involves some of the manuscripts that I talked about. So they are, it's also related to mourning. So whether it's particular to this period The manuscripts are yes, so because we have them from this period, but I would think that this phenomenon was also in other periods. We just don't have the manuscripts. But maybe Henrik wanted to say something related to that. I don't know.
Am I on now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think you sort of got in the way of what I was wanting to say, but I think your questioner was very right in talking about revenge, actually, and it has to do with this. It's a phenomena that we usually call revenge from beyond the grave, and this means that you have committed bad karma, and then it's your turn to sort of face Dunhuang in DU. And at that point, the old karma that you have created, that karma will stack up, and he will have a roll and documents on his table where all your merits and demerits are done, and he will use that to say, well, can we send you on for rebirth, or do you have to have a tour in the cauldron, so to speak? And basically there could be accusators in the hells or in the netherworld who will point out and say, he did this to me, And this is part of it's a place where canonical law and folklore or popular belief systems, they kind of mingle. And so this is why this fear of somebody, that maybe you borrowed money from somebody and you didn't pay it back, and then suddenly, he dies and you are left with that, and you have this vengeful spirit or this person with a grudge somewhere who is actually can harm you later on. And that fear is apparently a very tangible one. And it goes back way in Chinese history, actually. So it's not typical, that belief system from Dunhuang in the 10th century, but for sure you have it very strongly represented in the documents there, as you say. But I think Stephen Bokenkamp addressed this issue in a whole book published several years ago, more from a sort of a Buddha-Taoistic background of the Lingbao tradition. But it's about this fear of also ancestral fear that you have. If there's somebody in your family who has a grudge on you, it can come back and hit you at some point. So I think we should see it as part of this kind of belief.
Thank you very much.
We also have a question from Damachara. Would you like to ask it?
Thank you for the wonderful talk. Anyway, I like to know, the mantra, the Dhāraṇī that you translate, the last word, especially. No, actually there were two questions. One question is about the R. Would that be possible? The second R would be connected with the another word Om. R is become Om. So I don't read, because I never read actually the Dunhuang manuscript, so I don't know much about that, because sometimes they could make a smaller character if they become a combined, kind of become a vowel. And the other word is the the word, even though Chinese may be pronounced as but I think in old language usually pronounced as mu or bu, right? So it's certainly the sound would be the u sound rather than ik sound. That even Chinese is u or mu or bu, but it's certainly the last word has to be u sound. Anyway, that's just a little comment to my understanding. So. Thank you.
Yeah, so the sound is actually, this reconstruction that I'm showing or showed here is from Puli Blank's reconstruction of Middle Chinese, late Middle Chinese. So I think it's accurate, and the was a Rusheng character, so it had a K at the end. So.
I see.
I don't know. How it's pronounced today is of course a different. In Mandarin Chinese is a different matter. As for the and the Om, to be honest, I don't know. The Om is written in Chinese, consistently written with one or two different characters, and this is one of them. So maybe it's possible that belongs with it. I don't know. As I said, I would love to be able to identify anything more than Om and Swaha from this little spell, but I don't have the background in Sanskrit for that, so I might look to some Buddhist colleagues for that.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we have another question from Junfu. Junfu, would you like to ask?
I have one question.
Okay, we had another question before that. Maybe?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah. I wrote already on the comment box, but I have one small question. It is about the style of writing in Chinese Dhāraṇī. In Chinese Dhāraṇī, mostly what they are used for writing, like poetic style or prose style, which one they use most? I just want to know. Thank you.
Can you ask again? Because I don't hear you clearly.
The style of writing in Dhāraṇī.
Yeah.
Are they writing like a poem, or are they writing like a prose style?
Well, in this case, we don't know because we don't know what it says. I mean, it doesn't seem to rhyme, but it's very short again. So what? I mean, it's too short to determine whether it's prose or not, or verse, I think. But that's why it would be very interesting to kind of decipher it. So the version that we have in the Ming Dynasty edition, printed edition of this text, the Dhāraṇī at the end is much longer. So there it would be possible to see if there are any rhymes there happening. I haven't looked at that, so I'm afraid I don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so Junfu, I think you were.
Yes, so thank you very much for the inspiring talk. I have a comment rather than a question about the usage of the Dhāraṇī. You mentioned that these Dhāraṇīs were somehow burnt after the usage, right? And I concern more about whether these ashes that remain were also used or not. I have this question because that recall my memory reading about the Xixia Fangta Chutu, that corpus of Chinese texts. And in one of them, it somehow mentioned about a very similar context. So if you had a wife or your parent or your relatives, when they were about to die, you would need to use the to copy a kind of Dhāraṇī and then burn it into ashes, and you will apply the ashes on the forehead of your relatives. And by means of the power of this kind of Dhāraṇī, your relative could then sheng qi fang ji de shijie, so they can approach the Shukavati. And somehow I think it has something to do with the Dhāraṇī that you mentioned as well. It's about mourning, but it's also about a better afterlife. It's about how you can ascend by means of the power of this Dhāraṇī. You can ascend to a better Buddha world. So yeah, so it's just one of my comments, not really a question.
Okay, yeah, that's very useful actually. I think. I mean the copies that were burned, those were Ming Dynasty. I mean, we have evidence from the Ming period for that, and I'm sure the ashes would have been used for, as part of this ritual. But I don't think they're actually specifically connected with Buddhist rituals, right? So it was kind of a more widespread hybrid, maybe, form of caring for your parents or something like that. For the Tangut ones or the Chinese ones, we don't have evidence for them being burned, but it's quite likely. I mean, I would love to, if you can find the reference. I would love to look at that.
Yes, I can.
It sounds very, very interesting. Specifically, this kind of putting the ashes or applying the ashes to the forehead. We all love specific things, and there's nothing more specific than that.
That's true.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I don't see any further questions in the chat box. Would you like to ask something?
I'm trying to ask a question, but I don't seem to be using the system right. Is that right?
Is it David?
Yes, it is.
Oh,
Sorry.
I don't see you, but yeah.
Oh,
right, there you are.
I'm very sorry to arrive late, and it wasn't my intention at all, so I didn't catch the early part of your very interesting talk. But my question would be about the date. I mean, the dates on the qualifiers you showed are extremely precise. They're cyclical dates.
Yes.
Do they correlate with the Song dates? That's one question. And I mean, is there any way of correlating whether that's keeping a Song calendar? And the second question is, in your translations into Tangut or any other language at Dunhuang, are they? I mean, it's such a Chinese thing to be so precise about the date. I mean, is it a cultural thing? And is it also reflected in the translations into other languages of this kind of material?
Okay. Well, the date, I think most of the dates are actually in terms of the cyclical dates, right? And so you can so the jiazi, the 60-year cycle. So maybe there's one or maybe two, I don't remember now, manuscripts where you can connect it specifically with the reign period, and that is a Song dynasty reign period. But in other cases, you have to work from the context and kind of figure out what that specific combination of cyclic signs might refer to. But nevertheless, you can do it relatively accurately, I think. And when it goes, when it's about, for example, the Tangut case, those manuscripts are not dated, so we don't know for sure. But the ones in the Shende Si in Shanxi province, they are, one of them is dated, and again, it uses a Song dynasty reign period.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Reign title, yeah. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? Okay, if not, let us all thank Dr. Galambos for a fascinating talk, and thank you everyone for participating and for your questions. So thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, everyone.